That works. Excellent. All right. So everyone, welcome to the 2,324th meeting, I believe, of the Rochester Numismatic Association this March 8th, 2023. I hope you're all doing well. It's nice to see you tonight. I don't believe we have any guests. I'm looking at the book. I don't think anyone is written down as a guest. So I think everyone is a familiar face here tonight. So welcome, everyone. So we'll begin with some announcements. I didn't have anything particularly important to discuss tonight. I do not see Chris online. Oh, and by the way, welcome, Mr. Heck, Mr. Margolis, and Mr. Graver. Welcome online. Glad you're here. Carrie, anything from the treasurer to announce tonight?
Good evening. No real announcements. I'll just give an update on the RNA checking account. The current balance is $5,677.37. We still have several members who have not paid dues yet. So if you are one of those members, come see me and we can take care of that. Thank you and have a great night.
Awesome. Thank you very much. John, as the curator, anything for us tonight? Nothing tonight? All right. Cheryl, anything about the newsletter? Any announcements?
Well, you could tell people that I'll be looking for articles by the second half of April.
Yep. So for those that didn't hear, get your articles in by the second part of April for the next newsletter. We hopefully you all received the most recent newsletter just last week. So yeah, the earlier you can get those articles in, the better.
The mail went out on Monday.
That's the hard copies of the, got it, yep. Hard copies of the newsletter. Yep. Excellent. Any good and welfare announcements from anyone? Mr. Zabel?
I think this was mentioned a while back, but Doug Musinger was in the AARP magazine. Why? He was talking about selling coins when you don't know anything about it. It's a 2-page spread. He was one of the dealers that they interviewed and quoted in that article, along with Mitch Sanders, who I believe is also a member of our club. And they also talked to people down at Stax and at Heritage about selling coins. It was quite an interesting article telling people that, yeah, you got these old coins, but they made a lot of them. So typically they're common. But it was a very good article, and he was very well received. And Doug's made some very good comments.
Excellent. Thank you. I suppose we'll move on to exhibits and displays. I'll start this one off for a change. I brought something with me. I don't know if you all read, but I put an article in the most recent newsletter. I finally started to take some time to dig out some of my collection. I've been collecting for a while. I've been collecting for more years than I've been alive. So a good probably 3 decades or so. And it's gotten to the point where there's some things socked away that I've kind of forgotten about. So I took some time to kind of dig some stuff out. Found a couple really nice pieces. I found this 1862 Austrian florin. It's in pretty nice shape. It's probably been cleaned, but the details are very sharp. Come up, take a look at it. And a really nice 1875 Indian head penny, which I don't know where I got this, but it's in really nice shape, probably around AU. Just a beautiful chocolatey example of an old coin. So take a look. I'll have these up here for you to look at. Anyone else have any exhibits and display for tonight? John, you want to come up?
Yeah, we'll sneak up again.
Yeah.
I just happen to have with me something that Tim Corio wrote in 2010. This is a guidebook to Rochester Numismatic Association medals. Now, if you're interested in this, if you pay the club $3, you can have it. So later in the day, if you pay the treasurer $3, you can have this book. I only have one.
See?
do that too.
I've got something that I think will interest you. It's more tactile than visual. It's a silver bar, but it's not a 1 ounce bar. It weighs 98.6 ounces of 0.999 silver. And I'll just walk around to the table so you can heft it. It's really quite impressive.
Toss it around the room, yeah. Very cool. Unfortunately, you online can't enjoy that, but anyone else? Scott?
How you doing? Good. All right. Is this on?
Yep.
1, 2.
It was.
Somebody turn it off? 1, 2. Somebody did turn it off. All right. I just got this today, actually. So fresh meat is from the Azores. Does everyone know where the Azores is? Does anyone know where the Azores is?
Yeah, it's just several islands out there in the ocean.
It's in the ocean. We're in the ocean, if you want to think about it. It's a few 100 miles off the coast of Portugal, which is part of Portugal. And just for the fun of it, I will let you know that Carrie and I, are going there sometime this summer. It's a beautiful island chain. There's 9 islands. I don't know if you can go to all of them. I think you can probably go to 7 of them, right? Maybe. Anyway, we're going to go to 2. And anyway, this is a coin from the Azores that I got for my business. It is a 75 Reese. It is a 1794. It is graded PCGS AU55. And the Gomes number is 04.01. And I do have the Gomes actually. And I submitted a coin recently from the Azores. It's a countermark piece. And it should be back any day now. I did get the grade on it and saw the slab, and they graded it perfectly. They didn't put the Gomes number on it. I don't know why I gave it to them, and they didn't, but it doesn't matter. They did grade it right, and when that comes back at the next meeting, I'll bring it in. I did bring it in one other time raw. It was a counter stamp piece. Don't know if any of you came to look at it, but you missed out. But you'll see it in the slab now. But come up and take a look at this cute little silver piece, and it's beautiful. I think there's only one graded higher. So you see a lot of American stuff that is worth a lot of money with hundreds or even thousands graded. This thing has 1 graded higher, and you know, if this was an American piece, it would probably be worth $10,000, and it's not, so it isn't. But come and look.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Any other exhibits and displays? Chip?
Somebody knew that I liked some gold certificates. So he gave me a set of all the ones from the World War II era, and they're all graded 70. And here's the $100,000. Here's the $10,000. Here's the $1,000. Here's the $100. They're all made out of gold. Yeah. So I have no idea how they could be graded, but it's PMG and it's in the PMG holder. They're called Smithsonian. They come from the bills that were on display at Smithsonian. So it's real neat. It was a nice that somebody thought about me, and so I ended up giving him a birth year set of his coins. That was a little neat thing for him that he liked. So anybody wants to take a peek? Look.
Just to add the person who engraved the dies for those was Charlie Rogers. He used to be an engraver for the Mint, U.S. Mint. Then he retired. He did our metal for the 100th anniversary of the RNA.
Oh, cool.
But he cut these dies, which are incredible.
Yeah.
Just really incredible.
Huh.
He could be a great counterfeiter. Don't bring that around the next meeting.
They're all serial number A00000001A. So
Very cool. Awesome. Thank you, Chip. Anyone else? Scott.
So I am actually your speaker tonight. My topic is not TBA. It's actually the changing over of coinage designs upon the death of a British monarch. And so to go along with that, I brought the coins that came a few weeks ago from our friends at the Royal Mint in Britain. I don't know if anybody's dealt with them recently, but they have developed the annoying habit of putting new coinage on sale at 9 a.m. their time, which is 4 a.m. our time. And some of them in very small quantities and usually not giving you any opportunity to pre-order or even any announcement of what's coming. And so when they put the coins on sale, their initial run of memorial coins for Queen Elizabeth, I set my alarm. I got up at 3:55. I grabbed my laptop from the side of the bed. I logged in. I don't think very clearly at 4 a.m. They had a whole bunch of interesting items, including a 5-pound crown coin and the 50p coin that's also going into circulation that I'll talk about, and a 1-ounce silver coin. And again, I don't think very clearly at 4 a.m. and the pound was relatively low against the dollar. So anyway, I bought a bunch of it, and come see it during the break. It's on the table, and I'll be talking about it later on.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Thank you. All right. Anyone else? So I have one more announcement. So Carrie let me know that so next week, or I'm sorry, the next meeting, we are going to start to bring back snacks to our meetings. It was a yes, a round of applause for that. I know a lot of people enjoyed that. So so Carrie graciously offered to do that for the next meeting. So we would be looking for volunteers to do that for the remainder of this year, which I think there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yep. So 7 more meetings. Yeah. Not you're counting. So yeah. So come see me or Carrie. Let us know if you'd like to volunteer to bring in snacks and drinks for the remaining meetings of the year, and that would be awesome. So I think that's a good, hopefully, kind of step back toward normal, so to speak. All right, so with that, unless anyone has any other announcements, we will take a 10-minute break, reconvene here at 7:55 with Mr. Fybush's presentation, and we will see you then. Take a quick look at the auction items if you haven't, and the auction will immediately follow Scott's presentation. That's a pretty big quarter. Yeah.
I don't understand what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
We got our officers lined up.
So
who should I contact? Is there anybody I need to contact? What do you need me to do?
yeah, so that's Nick right there. So
Right.
If you want to start, you know what, let's just do this right now. Can I write on this?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I wasn't sure who you had contacted and who or what. Okay.
So I go, let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll split it here. I'll take these guys, you know, because I already talked to Nick.
Right, yeah.
And
Okay.
I'll remember this. So yeah, you want to just kind of reach out to them.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say sounds pretty on board.
Okay.
I mean, I would say the more people we can get though.
Well, yeah, because we had people fall out last year because I had the one guy want that to work.
Right. So yeah, yep.
You're okay?
When and where?
Well, we can have that at the same time. Pick a date. What day?
You don't have to do it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want these off?
Usually in May, right? May or June. May or June, right down early June, May.
It should be a bit tight. May probably would be for that.
Okay, all right. Yeah. He just asked me.
Let's go. Yeah, I know. It's been pulled in so many different directions. Yeah, so much fun. That's right. Yeah. I don't do a lot of news and actually. I could come up with stuff. Step bottom one there.
Okay.
Long live the.
26.
Long live the.
26.
Probably.
Why don't we shoot that? Okay. So the banquet, 26.
So if I put it on my calendar. I just queued it. Okay.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
$50 bill.
Yeah.
We could probably buy something for $50.
Hey, how you doing? Good.
Ah.
No, I emailed you. That's right. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I probably should have. No, it's all right. I'm not giving up. I did not. Now you know where it is, so we're here. If you want think about joining. Yeah, feel free. It's $30 a year for dues. You get a medal for the president current year. Obviously, you get a medal. Yeah, and a little plug. If you decide to be an officer, we are in the need of officer roles. You would end up getting your own medal as part of being the president. So something to look forward to and think about. But yeah, we're happy you're here.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah. Been collecting for a while, or?
Actually, well, yes and no. My father had big collection.
Yeah.
And my siblings are out of state, so I have it all now to do something with it all.
Sure. Yep.
And it's a lot to go through and try to figure out. And,
Yeah.
And then I'm finding a receipt from my grandmother. Obviously, my grandmother was involved. So I have, so what's in this little bag and why is it in there? What's the significance of it? There's a reason that's in there.
There's a story behind it. Yeah.
Why? There is some significance. And then
it's
there, so it's interesting to go through everything and to try to try to sure.
Yeah. Organize it.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's over there.
Well, hey, you're in the right place. us. So we'll help out with any questions you have.
So there's a bunch, and I can try to do something with most of it. Some of it, you know, I really like the Morgan dollars, so I think I'm gonna keep a lot of those.
Yep.
You know, there's a little of everything.
Yeah, cool.
You know, so.
Yep. Well, hey, we have every night we do an auction. So these are people that are here tonight. Doesn't cost anything. You fill out a sheet, you say, you know, bring as much or as little as you want, basically, and offer it for auction. Start at whatever, and fees or anything, you know. So unlike eBay where they take a big cut, you know,
Right.
You might find someone here who might be able to make a deal with some people outside the auction too who might want something. You never know. There you go. They were very popular for.
I actually got it fixed at the jewelry store, and I said, out of all this, I go, I don't wear any jewelry. I go, this is the only thing I like.
Yeah.
And I go, I broke it so many times. I said, so I don't care if you have to put more silver solder or whatever.
Right, whatever you gotta
I said, well, you know, you shouldn't be carrying. I go, that's the only thing I.
Right.
What, I don't have any. Am I gonna leave it to my grandson? You know, my girls don't want it, so why can't I use it?
Yeah, enjoy it.
It should be sitting in the drawer.
Yeah, exactly. Get some enjoyment.
So yeah.
I agree.
This one's got a little tone to it.
Yeah.
I pulled one out on a 60, it's close to that.
Yeah.
But it's almost like a root beer color.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, that's really
A
cool.
lot of the really cool toning, vibrantly tone points demand a premium.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of collectors collect just that.
Right. Yeah.
To some people, like more ugly. Yeah. Some people really like it.
Yeah. Some of those are beautiful. They get, you know, you can get that. It's like a
rainbow.
Yeah. Like oil in the water. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, welcome. We're glad you're here. So, any questions that you have, just let me or anyone know. Yeah, I pulled that out, Scott. It's like, it's actually pretty nice. Pretty nice coin. Yeah. I forgot where I got that.
Like a really nice, consistent brown.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm looking at. Man,
Spotting.
Yeah. I think it's all original. I mean, I don't think it's like
Why would it?
yeah, like there's some schmutz on the back that
No, if you were
yeah. But yeah, no, it's beautiful. You know, that pre 1880. So those are kind of hard to find in higher grades. So yeah, might be somewhere. It's probably that one, I believe.
That's what.
Yeah, but it looks nice. Details. Yeah. Cool stuff. All right, I'll probably make the announcement and have you get started here. All right, if everyone could take a second or two to get back to their seats, I will turn it over to Mr. Fybush whenever he is ready. Awesome. Take it away. Oh.
I'm gonna have to get some stuff set up before it's on. Okay.
Yep. So give us a minute online to get the presentation set up, and we will begin momentarily.
Wasn't that the other way around?
You don't know what you're referring to. This could be all about 1952 for all you know. It's not. You're right. All right. Wait for John to tell me he's ready to go with his end. Okay. Forgive me, I've been doing more stand-up comedy than numismatics lately, so I just grab the mic and start rambling around telling jokes. Just humor me and pretend to laugh. There you go. Okay, you go. Okay. All right. So you may or may not have heard, but the Queen of England died last fall after becoming the longest running monarch ever in the history of the English throne, or I think actually internationally. Apparently low system resource. Okay, there we go. And you know, for most of us, I think for just about everybody in this room, this is the first time that we've actually seen a changing of an English monarch within our lifetimes. And so, of course, the question arises for us as numismatists: how is this handled? What does precedent say? How is precedent going to change? And so I thought it would be a little bit timely to kind of run through a little bit of how this has worked for previous changes of monarch, and some of what we can expect now as King Charles III takes the throne. So if we have the next slide there. So let's jump back here to the beginning of the last century. Queen Victoria, up until Queen Elizabeth II, had been the longest serving British monarch. Very much like Queen Elizabeth II would eventually be, she served long enough that there were multiple versions of her portrait on British coinage. Her portrait was minted on coins of several other realms as well, and probably in larger numbers than any other monarch had ever been featured on coinage anywhere before that. She died in January of 1901, and the timing of a monarch's death is actually a fairly important thing in determining what happens with coinage. The tradition, I think going back centuries, has been that within the calendar year in which the monarch dies, you keep minting coinage with that monarch's face on it. And so obviously, you know, if a king or a queen dies in November or December, you're scrambling. If a king or a queen dies in January, you've got some time to work with. So in this case, Queen Victoria did the British Royal Mint a big favor, and she died in January of 1901. Her son became King Edward VII. There was plenty of time during the course of the year to prepare a new design featuring his profile. A little bit both unusual and usual. If you had been a subject of the Queen for many years, you would have seen portraits on your coinage for many years that always featured the Queen with some sort of a crown or a tiara or a diadem, usually with her showing her dressed in some sort of a gown. And so this portrait kind of returned to previous tradition in that it's just a bust. And it's an uncrowned bust. It is facing right. We'll see in a little bit why that makes a difference. Most of you, I think, know the history there. The only controversy really that this occasioned was the designers, a man named George William de Saules. And apparently there was some sort of a rumor that started floating around in the streets of London saying, oh, he's not English. We got a Frenchman to design our coins. No, he was actually an English designer and a very accomplished one. And I happen to think that his bust of Edward VII is a really nifty looking design. Looks really nice on the gold coins of the era. They actually have a sovereign from that era. That's not it. So if we have the next slide. Because he waited so long to take the throne and because he lived rather lavishly and without a lot of regard for his health, Edward VII only stayed on the throne for 9 years. He died in May of 1910. That was still enough time within the year, pretty much, to get new coinage ready for his successor, his son, King George V. Bertram McKennell, who was actually Australian, designed this coin. And as you can see, it very, very much followed the precedent of the de Saules design for his father, King Edward. Difference being, in this case, there's a more prominent mustache, as was the style of the time. And as you can see, the king is now facing left, continuing that rotation. Queen Victoria had faced left on her coins. This design remained in use for most of King George's reign. There were some variants on this around the occasion of his Silver Jubilee that he lived long enough to see in 1935. There was a crown portrait that appeared on some coinage in both the UK and Canada, but this remained pretty much the standard portrait of George V for his entire reign. Then things got a little bit weird. Let's skip the next slide there. Of course, his son, King Edward VIII, became king when George V died, and George V again died in January. Apparently a day or two earlier than he would have by natural causes, or at least a few hours earlier. The king's physician kind of administered something that sent him along. Not at the behest, we don't think, of the Royal Mint, which figured, oh, it still had plenty of time to get coinage ready for 1937 for King Edward VII. And so the portraits were made and the models were made. In this case, the UK decided that for most of their regular circulating coinage, They were going to come up with some new reverse designs also. Thomas Humphrey Paget, or Paget, I'm not sure how you pronounced it, was enlisted to do these designs. You'll notice that the king here is again facing left, and that's not normal. And one of the reasons, the reason why, is that when Paget came to say, okay, I'm going to design your coins, he said, look, I don't like the way the right side of my face looks as much as I like my left profile, so you're going to use the left profile. Well, Your Majesty, no, you're going to use the left profile. Okay, Your Majesty. So had these coins ever been minted in any numbers, it would have broken that tradition and King Edward would have been facing left. But of course, there was a woman involved and an abdication in December of 1936. This, of course, was highly inconvenient for everybody involved because it meant it was going to be very hard to come up with 1937 coinage for his successor. Next slide. King George VI. Paget again was enlisted to come up with a design. Honestly, I think if he had just taken the design he did for Edward VIII and just put George VI on it, very few people would probably have noticed. They're very, very similar, which makes sense. The two of them were brothers a year apart. So this design was prepared in time for some 1937 coinage, but not at the beginning of the year. I suspect, and I don't know this for sure, I suspect that one of the reasons why that didn't end up mattering so much was because everybody was in the midst of a depression at that point. The demand for circulating coinage was not tremendously high. However, there was a need in at least some places such as Canada in early 1936, of course, or early 1937 rather, for coinage that could not still be dated 1936 because it wasn't 1936, but could not yet have the bust of King George VI because they didn't have the tools ready yet. To add to the complication, at this point, the mint in Ottawa didn't have the ability yet to make dies for itself. All of that work was still coming out of London. And so they had to wait on the overworked staff in London to create their dies as well as dies for Britain and everybody else. So what did they do? Next slide. The famous 1936 dot coinage arrived. So here we are following the rules. We have to make sure that it can't be mistaken for something that was actually made in 1936, but we have to use the tooling that's still on hand. So there's the little dot. And as we well know, our former president of the club, John J. Pittman, was a particularly prolific collector of these coins. Some of the best ones that are out there came from his collection. Boy, if there's any one thing I'd ever like to own with RNA pedigree in it, that would probably be it right now. I actually do have a 1936 non-dot cent that came from Pittman's collection, and I figure that's as close as I'm ever going to get. So that was what Canada did. But those rules, even if they were really unwritten, were followed, and were followed. We know there was a little bit of coinage that came out in 36 itself for several African territories of the UK that actually said King Edward VIII in lettering, but didn't have a portrait on it. That's about all that you could really collect legitimately of King Edward VIII. So George VI also ended up in his own way being a little bit of a troublesome king for the coiners, not because of anything he did specifically, but because of what happened a little over a decade later in India. We go to the next coin there. So you can see that up until George VI, the coinage had that whole Latin lettering, DG, by the grace of God, Britain's omniscient king, defender of the faith, emperor of India at the end. And in 1947, of course, India and Pakistan achieved independence, and you cannot put imp on your coins anymore, which means now you need all new tooling right at the beginning of 1948 for 1948 coinage that's not going to say that on it. Well, yet again, now we're in the post-war years, things are booming, you really need coins. What do? Next slide. There's the new obverse that was introduced in 1948, but if it's not ready and you're the Canadian Mint and you got to put something out, next slide. You did the dot already, it's time you do the maple leaf. So all these 1947 maple leaf coins were actually struck in 1948. These, fortunately, for the most part, are relatively accessible and collectible. And if you wanted to make a set of those, you could probably afford to do that for the most part. And there are some variants with the tail of the 7 there and the size of the maple leaf that I believe are also collectible. King George VI also did not have a particularly long reign, as we know. He had lung cancer. He had all the stress of having been the wartime king. And he also happened to pass very early in the year 1952. Next slide. And that provided a good amount of time between February of 1952 and the beginning of 1953 for new coinage to be tooled up for the new queen. A designer named Mary Gillick was enlisted to design what would be the standard obverse, not just for the UK, but for most of its territories and the Commonwealth nations as well. This particular design, as you know, if you collect Canadian coinage, ended up with a whole bunch of engraved varieties that had different numbers of folds on the shoulder. This is actually the English obverse here, I think on one of her sovereigns. And this became one of the most enduring designs in history. We know, just like her mother, just like her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, that she lived long enough to go through a whole series of designs. I'm not going to recap all of them here, but if you go to the next slide here, by the end of her reign, there were a final set of designs in several different countries that all differed because it started to become more practical for other mints to create their own designs. The Canadian Mint by then had long since developed its own engraving department and could make its own designs. So after one last sort of unified design, the Arnold Macon design from 1965, which you will recognize universally because it was in use for so long and has been described as the most reproduced portrait of any human being in history because of all the different nations' coinage it appeared on. The final coinage for Queen Elizabeth in Canada was designed by a woman named Susanna Blunt, who I just learned recently, and I found this very interesting, actually worked in 1970 as an artist assistant to Yoko Ono. Who knew? You do research on these things, you find stuff. So that was her final design in Canada. If you see any recent Canadian coins, that's what's on there. Next slide. Final UK design was by Jody Clark. This one went into use in 2011. And was, I think, a realistic compromise between showing how old she actually was at that point, showing respect to the dignity of the Queen. There were several other portraits that remained in use around the world by that point. And again, all of these were produced in just absolutely massive quantities. And so now all of a sudden, we get ourselves to September of 2022, and Queen Elizabeth dies after all these years on the throne. And now what happens? Well, of course, the process needs to gear up again to have a new design for coinage for the UK, for Canada, for Australia, for New Zealand, for all of these world countries now. What do you do? Next slide. The Royal Mint in Britain worked very, very quickly. Almost from the moment that they knew that there was going to be a new king, and you knew pretty much that same day, fortunately, what regnal name he was going to take. He was going to be Charles III. They enlisted an artist named Martin Jennings. Martin Jennings worked very quickly and prepared a design. Second? Yeah, a lot of the UK coinage lately has been doing that. So they released these designs fairly quickly and announced that they were going to show up on coinage. But because of the sheer volume of coinage that's made now, all of this takes time. And so this is what all of these mints are working with right now. So in the case of Britain, they put out commemoratives pretty much right away. And that's what I've got on display on the back table there. So this is indeed the £5, and there's a commemorative crown design on the reverse that goes with that. They put out a 50 pence coin, which traditionally they've been using lately for a lot of sort of fast-acting commemoratives. And that one they released into circulation. I think at the very end of 2022, they already put it out with a 23 date. So they're getting a little bit slipperier now about maintaining it's got to be the year it was struck, right? And they also put out, at this point, they've done a Britannia bullion coin, and they've done a 1 ounce silver bullion coin. And I've got the 1 ounce back there too that commemorates the reign of the Queen. Everything else is still on hold. They are saying it might come out before the end of this year. I'm waiting to see what happens, particularly with this year's British proof sets, to see how they manage that and which sovereign shows up on the obverse of that. In the meantime, I think they are still putting out 2022 dated Queen Elizabeth coinage. in the UK. I don't think there's any 2023 dated circulating coinage other than that 50p coin out there right now. And I think they're just going with what they've got still from 22. Next slide. Canada also moved pretty quickly, and they made a different decision about how they were going to handle things, at least this year. They said, we're not even going to try to get King Charles on the coins for the most part in the year 2023. We're going to continue to put Queen Elizabeth on the coins. We're going to date them 2023, but we're going to put a mark on them that says 1952 to 2022 for the years of her reign. And you see the 4 dots there in between the 52 and the 22. I don't know what that's for. Take a guess. Yeah, they got over clever with us there. Those 4 dots are represent the 4 different portraits that appeared over the years on Canadian coinage of Queen Elizabeth II. So the original Mary Gillick, the Arnold Macon from the UK, Dora de Pettery Hunt, and then the final one that had appeared for the last 12 years or so. They also put out, I haven't gotten my hands on these yet. I was kind of hoping Jason was going to bring back one from Canada last weekend. They put out a toonie that commemorated the Queen at the end of last year, that instead of having the silver colored outer ring, had sort of a dark black outer ring as a commemorative for her. And those did go into circulation. I haven't actually seen one in the flesh yet. I'm told they're not really quite as dark as they expected them to be. Canada also would be happy to sell you an ungodly zillion number of different commemoratives. For some of them for ridiculous amounts of money commemorating the Queen, because again, they don't know how to leave well enough alone at this point. And you can go to the Royal Canadian Mint page and see all of those if you're interested. Next slide. Canada, like many other nations, is also trying to figure out what to do about their paper, or in this case, polymer currency. As with many Commonwealth nations, the Queen still figures on at least some of them. In this case, in Canada, she has long been on the 20. And there's sort of this feeling in a lot of the Commonwealth nations now that is bubbling up that says, okay, fine, we honor the Queen, there's a lot of tradition there. Maybe this is the right time to look at putting somebody else on some of our currency. And a couple of snarky Canadian websites asked for people to submit designs, and so people put up things with beavers, donuts, hockey players, and whatnot. Realistically, I have a feeling probably Canada will still stick with the monarch on their 20, but not everywhere. Next slide. So here's Australia. Australia had a debate about this. They went through a change of government. There were some arguments in Parliament. And what they finally decided to do, after initially putting the Queen with the 2023 date, nothing else, on most of their circulating coinage this year, they announced that later this year they are going to replace her on the circulating coinage with King Charles, I think with their own design that they haven't fully mocked up or released yet. It's already been pushed back, so there may be some rarities there at the end of the year. But they also announced, after initially saying that he was going to feature on their $5 note, which is their smallest note in circulation, they got enough pushback. They said, okay, you know what? We're not going to do it that way. We're going to do some sort of Aboriginal theme instead, but we're going to wait until something like 2025 or 26 to pull it together. And in the meantime, the Queen's just going to stay on there. It'll be interesting to see in some other areas where she's traditionally been on the money, whether there's pushback at all from anti-monarchists to having her on the money. There have been surprisingly few announcements that I've been able to find from a lot of other places about what they're going to do. And next slide. Oh yeah, I should have mentioned this. That particular obverse is on their commemorative dollar this year, which, God help me, features Vegemite on the reverse. I don't know why, but I'm half tempted to order this from them. Sometimes there are things that just because your scientists say you can do that on your coins, doesn't mean you should. Next slide. Postage stamps also are going to be an issue in the UK. You'll notice the UK, they've actually stuck with that Gillick design all these years, even as they've replaced the design on the coins, and it creates for such incongruity sometimes. So there's Her Majesty staring at Iron Maiden in concert for some reason. And for now, her silhouette there is still on all the stamps. So far in 2023, it's not clear, possibly after the coronation, whether Charles's silhouette will replace her. But the real what if, and here we go to the final slide, is what happens on all of these commemoratives from places like Niue and the South Sandwich Islands and all of the Falklands and all these places that are minted as non-legal tender by all of these other mints. So far, everything that I've seen come out this year is pretty much still stuck with keeping the Queen on it, with various profile designs from over the years. I have seen nothing thus far that has come out from pretty much any of these other mints that has Charles on it. I don't know whether that's a delay in getting royal assent, because as I understand it, the royal household still has to approve of every new portrait, every new design that comes out with him on it. Whether there's any prospect for some of these nations of having different obverse designs. I've never understood for some of these mints why their nation of preference to use for these would be one that requires using a monarch, when there are probably other small nations out there that they could talk to about issuing coinage for that would allow them to have creative obverse and reverse designs. Love to actually talk to some of these NLT mints like Bob Joy and find out why that actually is. But in the meantime, we wait. There's a lot that we simply don't know about what's going to come out with King Charles. I'm sure for the coronation, we're going to see a lot more, but this will be an area of collecting that will be very interesting to follow in the years to come. And of course, for some of us, at least now, to have the prospect of living through some more changes in the years to come. So final slide here. That concludes my prepared presentation. I got to be on the air at 5 in the morning, so I'm not going to stick around too much longer, but I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Catch about Edward VIII. There was no circulating coin.
There was not.
There were, however, circulating stamps.
I'm not a philatelist, but I believe you're correct about that.
Yes, it was a nice
okay.
series.
Oh, and I should mention also that then when his brother took over, you know, he could have gone two ways. He could have said, well, nothing ever came out with King Edward VIII that was circulating, so I'm going to face the other way now. Or he could have said, as he did, well, my brother should have been facing right even if he didn't, therefore I should still be facing left. And so he ended up facing left again, and Elizabeth faced right, now Charles faces left. And so we're back to the pattern.
Yeah. So this changing of portraits from the left to the right, would that go on with other countries besides Great Britain, like Denmark? Or,
you know, I don't know. That's a good question. I believe, at least in the British case, I know it goes back centuries, and I suspect it had a lot to do with literacy. And even if you couldn't read the inscriptions, just by seeing that the king is facing in a new direction, you know, you're dealing with a new king, especially when the portraits weren't especially lifelike.
Was this the symbolized change?
I think so, yeah. It's been one of those things that's been tradition for so long that I don't think anybody really knows exactly where it came from. It's interesting. It's a fun thing as a numismatist to follow, because we've known for decades now, oh yeah, the next king will probably be facing left. And he's such a traditionalist, there's no question that he would be. There is one thing Jason pointed out that I thought was kind of interesting, that we, you know, after all of these years, most of the coinage up until Queen Elizabeth, the entire inscription was in Latin, including the actual name of the king. And so it was Eduardus and Georgius. And then with Elizabeth, it was just Elizabeth. And with Charles, it could have been Carolus. And the decision was made, I believe, deliberately, no, let's put it in language that people speak now. And so it says Charles on the coin instead of Carolus.
Scott?
Yeah.
I understand from some people that I met in Phoenix at the ANA show that Canada is not going to be putting Charles on their coinage at all.
at all this year or at all ever.
Have you heard anything about that?
I have not, no. I mean, the last that I've heard is that designs are in preparation. It would be a pretty big leap for them. There's been nothing in Canadian Coin News yet suggesting that. There's been, the only debate that I've seen has been what to do eventually with the $20 bill, but I would be very surprised if he doesn't show up on the coins. Be a lot of design work. Think about for all the commemorations they put out to have to come up with obverse designs for all of them too. Be a massive project. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Scott. So I think that will conclude our regularly scheduled program at 8:23 p.m. Everyone online, thank you for joining. Hopefully we'll see you again next time. Have a good night. And for those of you here in the room, please stick around. We've got the auction